third year doing our third year doing a holiday webinar. And it's actually kind of fun to notice how historically much about the December holidays and just toddlers are not on the same page, and kind of observe how far we've come from how much less they used to be on the same page to how much they're getting a little bit better. Um, we're kind of guessing that if you prioritized being here tonight, you're not feeling like, oh, the holidays are just smooth sailing. You're feeling like, how will this work? And what should I do about my child's developmental phase and window and the expectations around the holiday? So it might seem like some of our slides, I'm just getting the slides ready, are oriented around how will you survive? And we know this, the holidays are fun too. They're both and they're not either fun or bad. They're hard and beautiful, sweet and sour. They're all of these things. So if you've just joined us, I know people are still trickling in. Grab a pen and paper if you can, if your evening allows you to have a pen and paper. We'll be using a couple of methods to keep this interactive, some journaling prompts, some brainstorming prompts, some share in the chat box prompts, and some polls. Polls are fun. Maybe we should move to the next slide.
Sure.
When we were the very first year we ever did this, it was in the middle of the pandemic, and we titled it Home for the Holidays with a Toddler. And then the next year we did it, we called it Laughing All the Way, because we were like, some levity is really needed. We're all a little crispy. And so this year we were laughing about the line from the song, the most wonderful time of the year. And we were like, I don't know. So then we were at no pressure or anything, the most wonderful time of the year. So if you're here, you've likely noticed that the December holidays can be fraught. So right now, if you could, in the chat box, if you can, put the ages of the children in the family that you're thinking about and the town and or a landmark where you live. This just helps us feel connected because webinars can feel a little 2D. So if you can put your town or a landmark, the ages of the children that you're thinking about, and which holidays are in the mix of your extended family. So there's your little family, and maybe your little family is just one parent and one tiny baby, or maybe your little family is several parents and several children. So in your extended family, we call those the people you gather with. Among the people you might gather with in a December holiday context. So we're looking for 3 pieces of information in the chat box: where you are, who your little ones are, and the mix of holiday possibilities. Maybe you're doing some Hanukkah and some culturally Jewishness or religiously Jewishness, or maybe you're doing some Christmas, and some of that Christmas might be religious-based Christmas, some of it might be secular or Santa-based Christmas. Maybe you're neither Christian nor Jewish, and maybe you're none of these. It's not religion in any way. Maybe it's pagan, maybe it's atheist. So there's so many different ways people show up during the December holidays with different levels of intensity of expectation, and what constitutes right and good and normal. And that's really a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight. So while you all continue to let us know your location, the ages of your littles, and which holidays you are thinking about, we'll move to the next slide. So continue to fill out your stats in the chat box, and Emily's going to pull up a poll so we can, there's a number of us here tonight. It looks like, I don't know, 15 or 20. And we want to know, in this cohort of people thinking about parenting through the holiday season or the December holidays, what kind of holiday are you participating in? And you might be doing one little one that's quiet and another weekend portion that's boisterous, one that's near, one that's far. So you can click as many of these as are relevant to you. So check out our poll that's just curious about, how do you anticipate showing up in the December holiday experience around big and boisterous, small and quiet, near or far? Just gives us some context it gives Emily and I some context, but it also gives you some context for each other of like, here are some birth roots families in Cumberland County, Maine. And some people are trying to figure out, what is a big, what is a small, what is a near, what is a far?
Looks like we have lots of older babies and some toddlers in the mix. Lots of 1-ish year olds to 4-ish year olds.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds about right. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll so you can see what everyone else is also doing. Pretty good, pretty good split, I'd say. Not too many super big ones, though. We have a pretty big family, so on both sides, so we have big and boisterous on both.
The notion that you and your little family might want something small and near, but your extended family has other ideas. We've been hearing some stories in birth roots classes about, especially if there's a newborn in the house, if there's anyone in your household who's under 12 weeks old, extended family not really understanding what that means on so many levels.
So one more poll before we get started, just to get the lay of the land so we can see what everyone else is thinking and experiencing, is how you are feeling about these upcoming holidays. And again, you can pick as many as you want. If there's an other, feel free to pop it in the chat too. There are probably myriad feelings we could have put up here.
You might be feeling both excitement and dread. You might be feeling cozy and exhausted. Some people just feel neutral. Some people feel conflicted. And we wanted to make sure we didn't exclude grief from the way of the many ways people might feel about the holidays. Grief is often silenced as maybe not a welcome guest at gatherings or whatever. And it's important not to feel invisible in our grief. And the grief could be about any number of things. It doesn't mean someone's died recently. It could, be one of my griefs around the holidays is grieving the mom I wish I could pull off. Like there's the vision in my mind about all the ways I'm going to be fun during the holidays. And then I get this little tinge of grief of like, boy, I don't have that much energy to do all those ideas.
They're all so good and so impossible to do all of them. All right, I'll end this one and we'll show you where you are. Yeah, a little smattering of everything. Nobody's neutral.
The biggest answer is conflicted. People are conflicted. I would say that probably draws a lot of people to this webinar, is feeling conflicted for sure.
All right. So I'm going to head back over to our screens so you guys can watch along, read along.
So we just wanted to include one slide because sometimes we forget we're paying attention to so many things and our attention is split and divided between so many things that in addition to December holidays, there's just a lot going on in our personal lives, in our professional lives, and in the world at large. So this isn't a particularly calm December in the world. The world's in some tough spots. So that may be weighing on your mind, and different families are impacted differently by the world stage. But also in our own families, in addition to the holidays, there could be health concerns that are challenging. There could be job changes or losses. There could be extended family that needs care, elder parents. Between people's health and their workplace stress, people arrive a little bit depleted and not having the ability to focus on gingerbread houses or whatever it is that might feel cozy and special to you. We long to show up in all of these ways that get portrayed as what's special, and sometimes we just can't give it our full attention. And so if you have a pen and paper, if you have some ability to brainstorm or jot down things or journal, what is on your plate or what is pulling on your attention in the next 4 to 6 weeks that is just kind of a big deal? It's going on in your family's life. And sometimes just looking at it written down on a piece of paper is like, this list here is competing with this pressure to perform and produce a holiday experience. And you can be like, oh, wow, that's a lot to juggle. That's a lot to balance, either in your very personal life or in the sort of global chapter that we're in, anywhere in between. So take just a minute right now, and if it's helpful to you, acknowledge in writing, these are some things that are hard for me right now, in addition to the holidays.
The fact that time flies so fast. Does anyone else feel like November was like 3 days? That's how it happened for me. So while you're jotting down, we'll We'll do a
Emily and I have a way overly ambitious agenda for tonight. There was so much we wanted to share with you, and we have like 24 slides we're trying to cover in 48 minutes. So
we might have been a little bit ambitious for sure.
so we'll slow down in about 20 minutes. So a lot of what tonight is about is naming things that may have not ever been named for you. If this is only your first or second or third time ever doing the holidays season, the December holiday season, as a parent or as a parent of two, then there might be some things that have never been named for you. And it's very validating to have someone else be able to articulate something you've been struggling with. And so I don't know if it was the last time or that we created this webinar and created this Venn diagram around holiday expectations and the truth about babies and toddlers. And there's some real conflict between those two things, but there is a middle of the Venn diagram. So in the toddler versus holidays Venn diagram, the things that are in the middle have to do with laughing, dancing, singing, music, joie de vivre, peekaboo, hide and seek, just ways that laughter erupts that feels not forced. And so you'll see sort of threaded throughout tonight's whole webinar references made to this kind of toddler versus holiday Venn diagram. Additionally, as we do this year after year, we get a little more refined. We wanted to acknowledge some sort of observations, realities, things that are sort of stacked on top of each other. We've noticed that partly through exposure to books that have been written recently, blogs, there's some great content out there, especially about the 4 lenses that we're going to be referencing tonight. And so this generation of parents, meaning you all currently parenting children from birth to 7, possess significantly more information about child development timelines than previous generations had access to. And while this is true every day of the year, there's something about the holidays that have the presence of powerful holiday traditions where we tend to revert back to familiar relationship patterns, even though we've learned some new ones. And for some reason, and we'll touch on that a little bit, December holidays in particular have these sensory anchors, the smells, the sounds, the visuals, that have almost a hypnotic effect on our brains, like homing pigeons. And this taps into our own childhood longings and sentimentality, or cultural pressures about a perfect experience. So this will come up over and over again, the need for it to be perfect, and what the effect that has on our toddler. So perfectionism, in reality, perfectionism is actually a stress response to past experiences that made us feel anxious. And the thing about toddlers is they resist adult agendas that are inflexibly wrapped up in perfectionism. Ooh.
Ouch.
Yeah. So if you've ever taken a nature camp session with me outdoors in the outdoor classroom, I always try to share little mantras because I feel like I can remember little mantras. And so a little mantra about the tension between December holidays and toddler development is, not only is perfectionism the thief of joy, but toddlers know this like it is their job. The minute they smell a hint of the pressure of perfectionism, they want to blow it up. So we have
And
a
they
slide.
do. They often do.
So we all, whether we mean to or not, whether we want to or not, whether we like it or not, fantasies have been sown in our mind about how it's supposed to be, how we're supposed to be, and how it's supposed to be. And the reality of toddlers is messier than that. It's not linear. It doesn't come out looking like in the media or on TV. And we don't want the fantasy. And I think I'm probably not saying anything new right now, but it bears repeating, it bears reminding. And what's helpful when you're trying to parent sort of upstream is to be around other people who are like, oh, right, I forgot. I knew a week ago, but here I am in the presence of my mom and I forgot about fantasy versus
Honestly,
reality.
we could all probably use this daily for the rest of the month to be like, oh, yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
now I don't have to be perfect.
All right, so back to the pens and papers, if that's working in your current scenario. We have some journaling prompts for you to reflect on, and some of these prompts are more relevant than others to you. So when a new family forms, meaning this baby or children that you're thinking about and their parents and their grandparents. So you think about baby or or siblings, and then the parents, and then the parents' parents, and sometimes there's divorce and remarried in there. Um, so how have you in the past, and how will you in the present and future celebrate December holidays? And is that more on a secular perspective or a religious perspective, or both? And just naming that out loud or on your piece of paper, or acknowledging it to certain family members that the integration of this is a little tricky and challenging. Acknowledging if there are divorced and remarried family constellations and whether this has been integrated. So Emily and I were talking about how one baby could have two parents who each have divorced. All parents have been divorced and remarried. So there's potentially like 10 adults with strong opinions about what must happen in the month of December. So just
And
take whatever.
sometimes the adults forget that a new baby has arrived, a new family has formed, and that might shift how holidays have been celebrated. So something may have to shift this year that has been in place for a while.
Mhm. All right, so I know you're maybe still journaling. We're moving quickly, and then we'll sort of slow down towards the end. So we have 4 lenses, and these lenses are truly gifts. We've put them in a gift box for you around being able to think about yourself and think about your child or children and think about your extended family from a sensory lens, from a neurodiversity lens, from a child development lens, and from a trauma informed lens. And so, what we're about to do is I'm going to introduce each of these lenses as a way of thinking about yourself, your child, and your family. And then Emily is going to talk about 3 very specific tools to use within the context of each of these lenses.
So one thing that is particularly tricky about holidays, especially holidays if you're celebrating in a new way, is that you can be blindsided by some of these things. So that's why we're doing this webinar tonight, is to help you think ahead. So part of what we're sharing with you tonight is how to prepare, survive, and recover. So 3 different ways that you can bring in some really thoughtful planning into your December. So hopefully in preparing, you can make some shifts and changes to help things go better than they might otherwise have if you had just kind of landed there and been blindsided. And then there are just going to be times where we land there and it's just not right and we just have to survive it. So we're going to share some things that you can do in the moment, and then recovering from things that might have been hard. So leaving a holiday that was hard for an individual or an entire family, ways to kind of shake that off after that experience.
All right, so we'll start with lens number 1, the sensory diet lens. And some of you have been thinking about sensory diets for many years. Some of you, this is the first time you're hearing this phrase. So I'll try to do a little bit of an overview. Every individual, whether grown and old or brand new baby, every single human has a different need for different amounts of sensory input. So the amount of sensory input that is just right for you and the things that are too much or too little for you, that's not necessarily true about your child or your mom or any of the people you gather with. And so we just want to pause for a moment and be like, okay, I have sensory needs for things to not be too much or not enough. My child has sensory needs for things to not be too much or not enough. Everyone we're trying to gather with has this same, not same, but has a sensory diet threshold or tolerance. And to be able to step back, take a breath, and be like, let's put the sensory goggles on for a second. So a classic holiday example of the sensory diet needs not being met exactly what keeps someone in their sort of comfort zone is, for example, if gift opening is a part of your family's traditions. Some families want to tear through all the presents as fast as possible, and other families want to open one present at a time and not rip the paper and save the paper, and it could take hours to get through the gifts. And so either end of that extreme perspective could make you feel like your head was going to explode. Like, why are we moving through these gifts so fast? Let's slow down and take a breath. Or why are we spending 6 hours opening these gifts? So that's just an example of the sensory tempo being off. Too much or not enough sensory input can increase frustration. And as grown-ups, we have some capacity for frustration tolerance. But my definition of a toddler is someone who doesn't have frustration tolerance. They don't have the ability, and rightfully so. We should not expect a toddler, your toddler might be 6 months old, 16 months old, 36 months old, and all of us dip down into toddler at some point. But when we are in a spot where we can't manage our expectations, we can't delay our needs, we are in toddler zone. And so when the sensory diet has not been considered and accommodated, and that frustration starts to creep up, the toddler in us and the toddler that we care for is going to struggle with that. And it's not going to be pretty.
So our prepare, survive, recover tips around sensory diet, and truly each of these lenses could have a dozen or more of each of these P's, S's, and R's. So these are just one thing that you can think about ahead of time or tuck in your back pocket for maybe needing them later. So in service of not being blindsided, take a minute now or before your holiday and think about and actually name some of the sensory needs that you have noticed for your immediate family that you are bringing to a potential gathering, and then communicate those ahead of time with the people that you're gathering with, so they know, so they have a sense, so they have kind of the secret to helping things go well too. If you share with them that your little one is feeling really nervous about entering a big space with lots of people, and you ask them to do their greetings in a kind of slower, calmer way, then your toddler won't be freaked out and in fight, flight, freeze all of a sudden the second you walk in the door. So the survive tip that we have, if you are going to a gathering with a partner, or if you hopefully have some kind of ally with you at this gathering, you can create a safety word so you can get some help if your sensory system is on overload, or if you notice that your toddler's is. So think about where you're going and actually look with your mind at that space and think about, where can we go? What can we do? What can we bring if we're really out of sync with what's happening, so we can be together and kind of reset ourselves. And so the recover is after any kind of big shift, big transition, big gathering, something completely out of the norm. Toddlers in particular are going to have some aftershocks of behaviors that come out after these experiences. So expect them and prepare for them, even initiate some kind of intervention to help these kind of leftover residual feelings come out. So, if a child is forced to or expected to sit at a table for way longer than they're really capable, that's going to be kind of squirmy inside their emotional system afterward. So now they're trying to regain some sense of power. They're trying to show you, I feel really off right now. So you're going to expect it, and you are going to use a tool that we call play listening. And so play listening is a special kind of play, an intentional kind of play, where you're going to look for opportunities to give your child the space to be the most powerful, the fastest, the most clever, really let them cackle with their power. And you don't necessarily have to, play a game. You can just be silly. You can bumble a little bit. You can nudge in a little bit of physical play. But really, it's about helping them regain their sense of power. And you take that kind of less powerful role. So I'm going to pop up another poll. And we want to know what you think your gathering's sensory experience might be. So even just taking this inventory and thinking about the things that feel comfortable for you, the things that feel uncomfortable for you, the things you've noticed about your child and what they need or definitely don't need. Taking this little inventory can really save a lot of tension and prickliness and upset and overwhelm on the other side.
If you've ever been in a room or at somebody's house where the temperature was turned up way too high for your comfort, or they kept their temperature way lower than you're used to, that's how children feel a lot of the time. And they can't articulate, I'm too hot, I'm too cold. And I mean that both literally and sort of metaphorically. Like, this situation is too hot for me, this situation is too cold for me. And so the more we can empower them with language as they're in the process of language acquisition to advocate for themselves, for both adults and children, too noisy is a real trigger. And you'll see some kids just covering their ears. And the holidays tend to be a time where, when we're normally not oblivious about the fact that there's music playing and the TV's on and the dog is barking, suddenly we're now oblivious. And so if you can take that breath and be like, how many noises are we hearing right now? Is it possible to reduce the number of noises? It can make a huge difference in people's ability to just stay engaged versus need to check out, need to leave the room or the building, or scroll on their phone, or whatever it is they do to cope with overstimulation.
As
And
Leah and
often, oh, go ahead.
as Leah and I were making these slides, we wanted to separate out the too loud, too quiet from the too many sounds or too many requests for children to be silent. Because sometimes when you're getting a sense of your own sensory experience, the difference between, it's not just too loud, it's that there's too much busy noise going on. And just knowing that about yourself or your family can really help shift an experience.
Mm. And it might be something that feels, of all the things we're going to bring up tonight, and how to like offer your people you gather with some insights, talking about things like too many noises can set people off. Can we be just more mindful about how many different noise sources there are? And that doesn't feel as like walking on eggshells as other topics might feel. Okay, so we're moving on to the neurodiversity lens. And so again, this tonight might be the first time you've ever heard the word neurodiversity, or this might be a framework and a lens that you've been thinking about for quite some time. So when I'm talking about neurodiversity, so if you remember that Birth Roots is a non-clinical organization. So as a nonprofit organization, we serve families around the topic of emotional health, which is non-clinical, versus mental health, which is clinical. So I'm not talking about diagnosing our family members, though that might be fun for you. I'm talking about just being able to think flexibly about the fact that different brains prioritize different things. So different brains make different assumptions about what is normal versus not normal. And so heading into a scene or scenario or context where we have layers of family members with assumptions about what is right and normal, or not right and not normal, and that those brains are literally prioritizing differently. When you can have a lot of self-awareness for yourself and for your child and for your partner, if you have one, and then shared language for communicating about different brains, can smooth out the logistics. Like, an example of neurodiversity is as simple as some people fully expect that things start on time. They happen at a specific time, they start at a specific time. And other people don't live in that world, and they're not wrong. They just don't relate to time like that. Their brain does different things with time. So then you have people arriving late. And does that make them morally inferior that they have arrived? And so just bringing up the topic of time can be a way to tap into the neurodiversity conversation. And I don't know how many people are dialed into Dr. Becky. She's very available and accessible on Instagram, if that's the way you like to gather information. But in her newest book called Already Good, she references the most generous interpretation as a way to make sense of our differences in a non-blaming and non-shaming way. So one of the reasons that I find the neurodiversity lens to be super helpful in making sense of myself and other people is when I can think, oh, my brain was prioritizing X and so-and-so's brain was prioritizing Y. It doesn't make either one of us better or worse or right or wrong. I can just see like, ooh, our brains were doing something different. And so to the degree that you can start to make sense of each of your family members through this is what my brain does and that's what their brain does, it takes some of the blame and finger pointingness out of it.
So the prepare part of our tips tonight are noticing those different priorities, noticing those different kinds of thinking. And sometimes just sharing that you have a different way of doing things can help another person come a little bit more toward toward you. So there's not two extremes, there's two people trying to meet a little bit more in the middle, and having some compassion for each other and some understanding of each other, that you being late isn't a sign of disrespect. It's that, you know, you have a toddler who's napping and you're not sure what time they're going to get up, or your brain just doesn't work that way. You know, you lose 15 minutes between the, you know, the house and the car that you needed in order to be on time. So bringing each other toward compassion and respecting the different brains that are in the room. So our survive is, it's really okay to take a time out and even plan for a time out. There are lots of ways you can pull this off, whether it's we need to go do a feeding in the other room, or we need an extra long time in the bathroom, or we need to go outside for a few minutes and get some fresh air. You can plan these things so your brain can have a chance to rest and come back to itself, and it's not so frazzled by the other types of thinking and styles that are around you. So the recover for this is right after the holidays. You can do kind of a warm debrief with the people who you actually want to have good communication with. You know, there are some people you're just going to accept it and move on. But for the people that you really want to keep developing a deeper relationship, you can share about how that holiday experience went for you, what worked, what didn't. Ask them what worked, what didn't, and notice how wonderful our different types of brains are. And then we can make some accommodations and shifts in how we do the next holiday gathering, whenever that is. So there's a tool called special time, and special time is when we delight in who the person in front of us is, and especially with our child. So this can be done with adults too, but specifically with our child. We really want to dip into their world and see the world through their eyes. So really trying to be there with them. So special time goes on their terms at their pace. And it's really such a contrast to how the rest of their typical day goes, especially around holiday expectations. So delight in who they are, just as they are for this moment, follow their lead, and just let it be time that they guide, that they lead, and that you follow, and just drop any kind of expectation. They just have your complete approval. So our journaling prompt for this, and again, you can journal as we kind of keep moving through, is to pick one or two people who have wildly different brains than yours and think about some ways that your brain and their brain prioritize differently. So if you think about family members who have very specific ways of doing things or react differently to different kinds of experiences, just start making a list, make a note of that brain is different than mine. And then you can think about, how is that brain different from mine? How can we meet more in the middle? So this is really good preventive work, preparation work, so holiday experiences can be more enjoyable for everybody.
All right, so the child development lens, again, your generation currently parenting the youngest children has a leg up on every previous generation. I know in some ways it feels like we're parenting in a harder time than previous generations, but in terms of the information we have, it is so empowering to understand that toddlers, I always cringe when there's references in social media spaces around toddlers being assholes. I'm like, they're not assholes. So the holidays are a great like test laboratory around expectations wildly mismatched, misaligned, misattuned. For example, children under 5, we often say that a child can successfully sit at the table for 1 minute for every year old that they are. So a 5-year-old has got 5 good minutes at the table. They don't have an hour. They just don't. And so helping the grown-ups understand, see, we're asking the child to accommodate the grown-ups expectations when really we need to ask the adults to accommodate the child's development. So in terms of being able to put the goggle on of, am I seeing my child through a developmental timeline of who they are? There's these big worries that we have of, if we don't teach a 2-year-old to act like a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old, then they'll arrive at 5 and 10 still acting like a 2-year-old. And we just have to trust the maturation process. So let's see what you're going to start seeing, and this is across the board. When a toddler has been pressured and overpowered to behave in ways that are inauthentic and not developmentally appropriate, they are going to push back through biting, hitting, tantruming, throwing, rejecting, becoming inflexible, guaranteed. In fact, if they're doing any of those things, we can probably reflect back on the last 48 hours and notice where they were overpowered and pressured and manipulated into meeting adult expectations. And that's where that play listening really saves the day. So we kind of have to wait out the maturation process. We can't rush it. We can't coax it, cajole it to be faster. We just have to let a 2-year-old be a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old be a 3-year-old, and enjoy what is fun about 2s and 3s. And the part that we're longing to do might not be till they're 6 or 7. And so we're going to prioritize connection with the current version of our child, who can't sit at a table for an hour, or who might only open one present and want to play with that thing and not open a single other present that day. And so let's take a look at the P, S, and the R around child development.
So again, in the service of not being blindsided, either you, your toddler, or the group you are gathering with, think ahead about where developmental mismatches might be. Are you being asked to arrive at someone's house at 6:30 at night for a dinner? That is probably going to be a recipe for disaster for your toddler. You could, make a go of it, but explain and share your concerns with the family and say, we might have to leave if, we might have to go to a different room if. So helping them have expectations that are developmentally appropriate for your family. And it's super helpful to remind them that it's just for now. It's just for this year, maybe a couple of years. But sometimes people can be so tightly holding on to their holiday celebrations that they forget that it can be a little bit different this year and next year. And then maybe by the time a child is 3 or 4 or 5, it can get a little bit closer to the way they really love to celebrate it, that makes it special or meaningful for them. Or they might just get used to a different way, and it can be that way forever. But go ahead and insert that limit ahead of time. Let them know that you will not be staying past X time, or as soon as there is a sign of a tantrum brewing, you're probably just going to have to pick up and go. And that doesn't mean you don't love them or all the work they put into making that celebration come to life, but that's just your reality right now.
The other thing about child development and the holidays is nobody enjoys, and by nobody, I mean the toddler doesn't enjoy it and the grown-up doesn't enjoy it, having to say, don't touch the baubles, don't touch the tree, don't touch the decorations. And so having to spend minutes or hours in a non-toddler friendly space is just torture. And so the farther people are from toddler development, the more unrealistic their expectations get. And to the degree that we're not asking unrealistic expectations of the toddler, the event is not stressful. So if it's stressful, it's probably because the expectations are not toddler appropriate. And if it's not stressful, it's probably because the expectations meet the toddler development.
It's magic, really. So your survive is, you are probably going to have to take a leadership role here at some point and really set that limit. And I highly recommend that you think about these and practice them ahead of time. And you can say them in funny ways, you can say them in demanding ways, in angry ways ahead of time. So you're really confident and comfortable saying, oh, I totally saw this coming. We have a plan. We're going to go outside for a little bit. We're going to go for a walk around the block. We'll come back in, and hopefully we'll have shifted and we can join back in. But you're going to confidently state your limit, state your plan, and just follow through with it. I think it's Janet Lansbury that talks about confident momentum, I think she calls it, where you're so sure of your plan. You just exude that confidence as you move through the plan. And you just don't even let someone kind of nudge into and make you doubt what you're doing. So leadership role, practice it ahead of time. So you can, in that survival moment, really just pull it right out of your back pocket. So stay listening is a tool that can, so if you haven't heard this before, this is something I talk about in our toddler parenting class. Every human being has an emotional system, just like we have a digestive system, just like we have an immune system. And the emotional system, when it is in stressful, overwhelming, scary, weird situations, it gets a little rattled, and it's like you pack in some like grit in the gears that need to be turning for that emotional system to be moving freely and go and feeling flexible, feeling like it can move. So stay listening means when they are, I'll pop through too, when they are in a place where they are having a tantrum, when they're really upset, when they're throwing, hitting, biting, or being inflexible, whatever it is, if you can sit with it and just listen and not try to resist it, that is their body's natural, innate way of clearing out their emotional system. So whatever they took on during that gathering that was mismatched for their needs, they can offload it with your help. You're kind of like the anchor in that emotional storm for them. So you're going to look past that behavior for at least the few days after that event and just sit and listen with warm attention for as long as you can. You know, they might want to go for a half an hour and you might have 5 minutes of listening. That's fine. But while you're listening, don't try to fix it. Don't try to convince them of anything. Don't bring any kind of logic or reason in there. That's just not where they are in that moment. Just listen as much as you can until they're done. So go ahead and pop in the chat box. If you can think about your event that's coming up, picture it in your mind, picture the people that are there, think back to previous experiences you've had with them so far, and what kinds of things might be planned right now that you're thinking, ooh, these probably are mismatched to where our family, our toddler is right now. And I can see that this is going to cause some stress, some difficulty. It's going to be a big ask for a toddler to do what they're asking your toddler to do.
Go ahead and
So
put that in the chat box.
who has ideas? What are you seeing so far for what might be mismatched?
Emily and I were having a good laugh about the fantasy of getting a bunch of people wearing matching pajamas, but your 2-year-old has thrown down and will not put on the matching pajamas for the photo. And everyone else has their matching pajamas on, and your toddler has said no thank you. They've had a autonomy boundary. And now you
In
are
toddler language, which is they've gone surfboard rigid or jellyfish uh, loose, and they will not get those pajamas on.
or needing, needing the cookies to be decorated in a particular way as opposed to toddlerese cookie decorating.
We did have a family tell a story about I think it was an aunt who had set up the most amazing cookie decorating scenario for children who were under 5. And it was, as you know, because you're parents of toddlers, just it was a disaster. I mean, it wasn't a disaster. The toddlers had a great time, but it was a disaster for the aunt who had in mind this end result of, picture perfect experience and picture perfect cookies that were at the end.
I see in the
That's
chat box that there are many food related
yes.
mismatches. On any given Tuesday, having someone who fits the category toddler be at a thing like a table for any length of time, putting nutritious thing in their body, like this is challenging on a Tuesday, right? So to have like unusual people at the table serving unusual foods at unusual times, not gonna happen. Like heading into that, like maybe it will work, maybe it will happen. Futile. It's just not. And the more we pressure, the worse it gets.
So I want to, there's one comment here that really highlights something super important. A house that isn't in any way kid proof. And the adults in the room cringing because the toddler is being a toddler. They're curious, they're interested, they don't have full control over their body. They bump into things. Special time is the antidote to this feeling. If you have ever been in a place where you felt total disapproval of you from everyone around you, that doesn't feel good. No one has to say a word. We can feel that. Our emotional system works without words. We can feel it. So doing special time before and after an event like this helps to reset this kind of, um, people who just don't get toddlers and are annoyed by them.
And no one likes there to be no one wants their parenting to be judged, and no one wants their child to be judged. That's a terrible feeling that your child is being judged.
Especially because of inappropriate expectations.
All right. Are we on lens number 4? I think this is the last lens. Trauma-informed lens. And again, it's possible to be non-clinical and trauma-informed. So there's an entire body out there of clinical trauma-informed ways to be trained as a trauma-informed clinical professional. That's not entirely what we're talking about. What we're talking about is non-clinical, emotional support, community-based, trauma-informed lens about our lived experience being in a family, coming from a family, moving forward with our new family. So when I say trauma informed, I'm mostly talking about our nervous system. And some people in this room have thought a lot about nervous systems. Some people haven't thought a lot about nervous systems. But when our capacity to cope is overwhelmed or we feel overpowered, we can get frozen, we can get stuck. And the thing about holidays is that there are both emotional triggers and behavioral triggers. So we often think about a trigger as I was triggered to relive a bad feeling, but compulsively needing things to behave, needing an experience to play out perfectly, that's actually being triggered in us. And so when we feel in ourselves or in other people this sense of urgency and compulsion that it must be one inflexible, specific way and it cannot possibly be any other way, that's a trigger and it's living in our nervous system. And it kind of needs to be shaken out of our nervous system through silliness, through like the antidote to super rigidity is super flexibility of like, well, what if it was like really different than that? And so, some people were really appreciative that we mentioned grief right off the bat at the beginning of this webinar. And so if we are carrying around a grief in our body, and more recently people have been sharing about how grief is not actually an emotion. You wouldn't like sadness is an emotion, but grief is actually a state in our body. And so if we are traveling through this next month and there's some grief in our body, we need to tend to that ourselves, and or we might have an important person in our lives that's part of who we gather with who has a grief in their body. And so doing a little extra reading up about, there's just some great resources out there now about a trauma informed lens and how grief hangs out in our nervous system and like literally in our bodies, and just making space for that, slowing down. And sometimes when we're feeling triggered or that we might get triggered, what we do is we move as quickly as we can through a situation so we couldn't possibly dip down into our emotions. And so remembering to breathe, remembering to drink water, remembering to rest, slowing down are really where we put our caregiving energy toward ourselves or the people we're gathering with who might need that extra bit of attention. And so thinking about one's own nervous system, our child's nervous system, the people we gather with, and how their nervous system is doing is the lens that we're offering as the 4-part lens for thinking about the holidays. And do you want to talk about the?
Yeah, so our preventive tip to prepare for situations where this might be present are to think about those areas where you see relatives or you see yourself getting rigid, getting inflexible, getting urgent about something happening the way you think it must happen. And sometimes we can use our good thinking adult, not triggered brain and kind of lend that calm to the person who is feeling a little bit rigid or triggered. And so when we can be that kind of anchor in that adult's emotional storm, or for our partner, or for another family member, we can help them come back to their own good thinking and their own flexibility. So we might try to rally for that pajama picture. You know, we know grandma is really into it. They really want it. But maybe this year we're going to start by doing some silly pictures first. Or maybe we're going to start by putting the pajama pants on our head. And sometimes just those little bits of silliness and getting people laughing and shaking up that routine just a little bit can help everyone's nervous system kind of soften, and come together with everyone else around them. So maybe a little bit of silliness ahead of the thing that is a high expectation, um, or just maybe bringing your concern to grandma and describing what your toddler might look like if you try to put them in those pajamas at that time of night, and get a little silly with the image that you're describing to grandma, and see if she can join in the laughter just a little bit about how that might actually turn out. So your survival is being equipped with these new insights about how neurodiversity works, how trauma-informed lenses work. You are going to think about how not to meet fire with fire. So one of the trickiest things that can happen is when we go head to head with someone who is in that rigid, inflexible, triggered state. We actually just want to go kind of sideways and under and around, because going head to head is just going to inflame it even more. So think about some ways that you can swing the pendulum in the other direction, during a moment, before the moment, wherever you can, to just bring in a little bit of that softening. And so the last recovery tip is called listening time. And this is, again, is a hand-in-hand parenting tool that we talk about in the toddler parenting class. And listening time is a really powerful tool that can be used any time of year. It's a place where you as an adult get to let your own feelings out. They flow freely because you have an emotional system too, and you have to clean your own emotional system out. So venting, crying, complaining, laughing, raging, celebrating, bragging. My favorite is saying what you really wanted to say. Like, you don't have to hold back at all. Just blurt it out, no filter, and just let those feelings flow. And your listener isn't going to try to fix it. They're not judging you. And what is said in listening time stays there. It's not mentioned again. So you each take a turn, you clean out your emotional system, and then you can have your best, most flexible, most anchored thinking available for this high expectation experience.
If we had more time tonight, we might try to figure out how to pair you up for a listening time on this prompt right here. But since we don't have that kind of time, let's use this as a journal prompt. But it's an interesting way to think about listening time is almost like having, instead of journaling, so you're speaking your journaling. So you don't hold your, like, journaling is not a place where you go in and fix your spelling mistakes. It's just a like stream of consciousness. And so listening time is like stream of consciousness, where it doesn't have to be your final thought. Like, what you say in listening time isn't like, you might have better thinking later or different thinking later. So our prompt right now is: list some ways that children in your family of origin, so when you were growing up, you and your cousins, were convinced to comply with grown-up holiday expectations. So for example, what would happen if you didn't wear the right clothes, sit at the table, smile for the photo, hug grandma, say thank you, act appreciative? Just brainstorm right now a list of possible ways that you were convinced or coerced to fulfill these expectations, and what was sort of the threat or the worry that what might happen if you didn't do these things. And that can be really insightful around where you're coming from in tensing up about this.
And do this this is just a super quick sketch that you're putting down on paper, or thinking about in your mind right now. Go into this deeper later, because we won't have time to do that tonight. But just let it start a conversation in your mind, or let it start a conversation with your partner or a close friend, family member, who can support you in listening to you. So in wrapping up, we wanted to leave you with some ways to think well about this upcoming holiday gathering that is on the horizon, and think about the goal of this holiday celebration. What is the real goal? Is it sit at the dinner table for an hour and a half, or is it something a little bit bigger or broader than that? And think about the actual humans who are going to be there and how you might pull off really the essential parts of the holiday. What are the most important things? And you're not going to be able to do 12 of them, but you might be able to do one or two of them. So start thinking about the priority of what makes this holiday special, what makes it enjoyable, for the actual humans that are there. It's a lot to think about in 3 minutes. But again, these are places to start. And these are hopefully places where, we're probably not going to move the needle or change the trajectory in a really dramatic way. Although sometimes you can, sometimes families will be able to rise to the occasion of where things are right now. But even if we can shift the trajectory just a little bit or push that needle just a little bit, that experience is going to be so much more enjoyable. And you're going to know yourself and your family a whole lot better.
If throughout this webinar you have taken notes, you've done some journaling, you've done some brainstorming, look over sort of your collection of wherever and however you've been jotting things down and circle the phrases that are the most meaningful to you on your notes. It could have been you were just randomly taking notes, or it was one of the journal prompts, or you were brainstorming. Circle some of the places where you're like, that phrase was important to me or meaningful to me, because what we'd love for to happen right now is for you to jot down in the chat box some of your takeaways, some of the most helpful things from tonight that shifted your thinking or shifted your energy or your perspective. And if you can add your takeaways and your favorite things in the chat box, we'll read some of them out loud as sort of a way to review what we've covered tonight. I just love what people look down over their notes and realize, this was an important thing I needed to hear. And if you could pop some of those into the chat box, Emily and I will read them out loud.
It's one of my most favorite things about how we do what we do at Birth Roots. We can learn so much from each other, and we can get inspired by each other because we've taken the time to think well together, and to share these insights. Even if you don't have a solution, you might now know the question that you can think about.
Mm-hmm. Realizing I'm as stressed about grandparents' expectations as I am about my child's behavior.
Trusting maturation. Oh, we all need a big dose of this. Letting 2-year-olds be 2-year-olds and not expecting them to behave like 5-year-olds is so important. And older adults forget about what 2-year-olds are really like.
I love the idea that setting boundaries with the grown-ups is something we need to do, but instead we set boundaries with the child, and really it's the grown-ups that need boundaries set with them. Confident momentum, stay listening.
Yes, it's okay to set boundaries, even though they won't like it. They can have their feelings. Maybe you can stay listen with them too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that confident momentum phrase has stuck with me since I read it. When I think about it, I can picture it. It helps me actually do it, especially when I have had some time ahead to think about what my plan is, because it's hard in a stressful moment to come up with a plan. But if you go there with a plan, that confident momentum can really come out.
Mm. The importance of honoring the grief that we might be carrying in our bodies.
Listening partnerships is a great time to be sassy and rude to the elders in your family. If you can let it out during listening time, you'll find you have a lot more spaciousness for their rigidities and for their off expectations. It's a little easier to find that that response rather than kind of a grouchy reaction to their feistiness.
When Emily and I were preparing for tonight, I was trying to role model the nonchalantness where you truly trust in maturation. You're just accepting of a 2-year-old being a 2-year-old. And so something goes down and some eyebrows are raised, trying to pressure you into getting your child to be, on voice command or something like that. And you just are like, let 2-year-olds be 2-year-olds, they're two. So when they're 4, they'll be 4. When they're 10, they'll be 10. And just instead of like feeling like we need to do better, do more, make our children act a certain way, just be like, they're 2.
Someone might be dumbfounded by that. You mean you're not going to do something about it? Oh, they're 2. Look at them being 2.
Oh,
This
they're
is
so
so
cute.
2. Oh. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for making it here. And for those of you who are going to watch this on recording, we hope you are having a maybe nice bedtime with your toddler. And hopefully you can enjoy these prompts and ideas too for a hopefully smoother upcoming celebration.
And so this winter, some of you are dialed into the fact that for the past 3 winters, we did a 100 Days of Winter program. We're doing a modified version of that this winter. And so we'll be sending, as participants in tonight's webinar, you'll be the first to get the email announcing dates and times and of sort of a more a la carte style of participating this winter. But I do know that Emily has, I think, January toddler parenting class coming up. And what was another thing we wanted to alert people to? Can't remember, but we'll
Let's see,
stay tuned
Talk
for email.
Tunes is happening too.
Just
And hopefully a longer series for parents of toddlers will be in January also. We're still kind of figuring out the details on that. But stay tuned, we'll keep you posted.
yeah, so great
And
that you can all
we'll
make
hear
it too.
about your holidays in those January events. You can have a chance to debrief.
Listening time.
Thanks,
Take care,
everybody.
everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.